your career as a plastic surgeon, helping people look younger on the outside there. And at some point, you walked away from all of that and actually went into making people younger on the inside, right? So what was that moment in your life, in your history there, that made you shift?
I had a bicuspid aortic valve, which is a common anomaly, shrank down to about the size, less than the diameter of a dime. And that is what required me to have an operation, so-called Ross procedure, same operation that Arnold Schwarzenegger had.
Can you explain a little bit more of what's going on in our bodies when we do fast and why it's so good for you?
The best new thing that I've heard about in the last year or two is nattokinase is an enzyme that breaks down fibrinogen, which is an element of plaque. If you take it on a regular basis, and I'm talking about 1,000 milligrams a day, it reduces the plaque burden in your entire body by about 36% after a period of 8 months, which is a remarkable benefit.
I love hearing you talk about something such as simple as fasting or low cost, if nothing else, also having the compounded benefits of over time of weight loss eventually and inflammation and all of that. This is the Longevity Loop podcast, and I'm your host, Brent Wallace. In every episode, I bring you the leading voices in longevity, plus my own insights to put the world's best strategies directly into your hands, making elite longevity strategies accessible to everyone, regardless of your background. So let's jump into the loop starting right now. All right, Jim, welcome. You spent your life and career, maybe not your whole life, but your career as a plastic surgeon, helping people look younger on the outside there. And at some point, you walked away from all of that and actually went into making people younger on the inside, right? So what was that moment in your life, in your history there, that made you shift from one thing to another?
Well, I think it was actually very early in my career because I had a couple of health issues that made me focus on certain things. When I was 19, I was listening to my own heart, and I heard a diastolic murmur, which nobody had before that heard. I went to the heart station at the University of Michigan, and they told me that I had a bicuspid aortic valve, which is a common anomaly. It's the most common anomaly. For two of the three valves in the aortic valve are sort of fused together, and that causes turbulence in the flow of the blood over that passage. And over time, it causes the deposition of calcium and exaggerates the effect on atherosclerosis. So when I was about 20, I worked for a pathologist, and they would do these autopsies on people that had died suddenly. And my job was to get a slice of the heart because we wanted to look at the degree of ischemia from the center of the event out to the more peripheral parts. And what I was struck by was how the entire aortic root, looking at it grossly, it was just covered with atherosclerotic plaque, yellowish stuff that, you couldn't really see any of the anatomy. And that led me to understand that this process that happens with virtually everybody that has a bicuspid valve. If the valve is not very deformed, it takes longer for it to become more deformed. What happens is the deposition of calcium and atherosclerotic plaque leads to a stenosis of the valve. So if your outlet normally is, say, the size of a quarter, a little bigger or smaller, mine over a period of about 30 years shrank down to about the size, less than the diameter of a dime. And that is what required me to have an operation, so-called Ross procedure, same operation that Arnold Schwarzenegger had. In his case, they accidentally cut into one of the pulmonic valve leaflets. The procedure is to take the pulmonic valve, which is a three leaflet valve, put it in the aortic site, and it can tolerate the the systemic pressure, which is, 120/80. And then in the pulmonic site, they put in a homograph from a cadaver that has been purified. And that whole period of time, when I first found out what I had, and I noticed that I saw the atherosclerosis and the calcium, I was concerned about it, and I took various measures. For example, taking aspirin in high doses, which I think did slow down the process. And it was a concern all my life. I mean, when I went to the heart station, Park Willis was the physician in charge, and he told me I shouldn't do anything like it was in Michigan, and pushing a car out of the snow if it was stuck, or playing basketball for an hour because of the stress on my heart. Now, that's no longer a belief, but it affected me in various ways. I mean, psychologically and thinking about these things. And it turns out that a lot of people who are interested in age science have some kind of a history like that. So I had, when I was 56, I had this procedure. I went to Oklahoma to have the guy that had done the most procedures do it. And that's a big operation where they take out the aortic valve and take out the pulmonic valve and put it over here, and then put this valve back. And then in addition, I also had an aneurysm, a 6 centimeter diameter aneurysm of my aorta. They had to replace that. So it's a big procedure. And most cardiac surgeons have never done the procedure. And I think it takes somebody with extraordinary talent and can do it fast, because you have to be on a coronary bypass pulmonary pump, for some length of time. And I was on it for 2 hours and 10 minutes, I think, which is pretty lengthy. But I did fine. I've never had any problem with it. Unfortunately, Arnold had one of these valve leaflets that they cut into accidentally when they were taking out the pulmonic valve. And this is common knowledge, I guess. And they sewed up the leaflet, and went ahead and did the procedure. But overnight, it became apparent that he had a complete insufficiency, meaning the blood was being pumped from the heart into the aorta, and then it would come back in. All the blood would come back in, and they had to take him back and do a replacement again, which I think they used a pig valve, which is used for a long time. They probably still are, but it just shows to me the complexity of the procedure, and I'm extremely grateful that these people were so skilled. And Craig Elkins is now the son of the guy who originated the procedure in the United States, and he's moved on to doing nothing but heart transplants. And that was in 2003 when I had the surgery. But the whole experience made me acutely aware of what things can happen, and the nature of atherosclerosis and all kinds of things. So, and then I became diabetic when I was 44, I guess, or 46, type 2. My parents both became type 2 diabetics, but at a later age. But I had the genetic predisposition. And those two things certainly made me much more conscious of what it takes to survive. And I just was extremely grateful that I could have the kind of medical care that I had by these really expert surgeons, and the treatment of diabetes also. So I was practicing plastic surgery, but I became interested in lots of topics related to longevity, especially calorie restriction, because Roy Walford was a scientist at UCLA who did a lot of work on calorie restriction. And he was I read what his work was about, but I got to the point where I was still practicing, but I became interested in what was in the science going on regarding calorie restriction, because it's such a powerful force for good health. If you can get people to follow a calorie restriction plan, by calorie restriction, we mean giving an animal less than it would normally eat to maintain its weight. If you restrict the animal by 40% of its calories, that is to a 60% level, they will live 40% longer, which is a striking fact. And then in 2003, Mark Mattson at the National Institutes of Health, who is the theorist behind all the calorie restriction forms that humans have adopted, that is intermittent fasting, wrote a paper in which he showed that a fat mouse could be healthier than a thin mouse if it was fed every other day, which didn't make any sense to me. But the fat mouse was modified genetically so that it ate most of the food on one day, and they studied it and showed that it's the level of insulin and glucose in that fat mouse was lower than it was in a calorie restricted mouse, which is very significant because those two biomarkers are very significant. And so it was sort of like an epiphany for me to hear this, because it went against all the information we have about obesity. And so I decided to try something like what he was doing. And I figured I could probably get by on 20% of my normal calories, because if you have 100% one day and the next day you have 20%, those 2 days, 120%, if you divide that in half, that's 60%, which is the level that imparts these really miraculous kinds of defensive mechanisms against aging process. And I had my patients start doing it, and friends, and people thought I was nuts at the time. And but I organized a trial. I wanted to show that it had strong anti-inflammatory characteristics, and so I chose to use asthmatics who were obese, and because I didn't think that I could recruit people simply on the basis of wanting to go on a diet. And I did recruit, the sufficient number to do the study I did. And I got one of the pulmonologists at LSU, head of the department. And we did the study. It was 8 weeks in length, and it showed remarkable changes in all the various biomarkers by reducing markers of inflammation. I went to a meeting of the Calorie Restriction Society where it happened coincidentally that Mark Mattson was speaking. He was a paid speaker, and I introduced myself, and he became very interested in it because nobody had done any trials like this. And he said, "Do you have frozen samples?" And I said, "Yes, 180 of them." He said, "Why don't you send them to us?" So he and 6 postdocs worked on these things to analyze things that you couldn't get done anyplace except, the NIH. And the results were striking and remarkable. The level of one thing that is a part, but it related to oxidative stress, a molecule called nitrotyrosine, has been shown to be the most accurate predictor of a future heart attack. And it went in 3 weeks, it went from the initial level down 90%. And there's never been any study that showed that degree of change. Then other markers like TNF alpha, which is the primary source of inflammation in rheumatoid arthritis and other things, went down by 70%. These are very striking changes. And so we published it, and it thereafter, this is in 2004, a long time before anybody really caught on to it otherwise. Then other researchers did catch on, and they have done a lot of work that's very explicative of what the various processes going on are, the molecular mechanisms, the downstream effect of calorie restriction. And I was satisfied at that point in doing that because I had exploited this process, the calorie restriction mechanism, which has been in living creatures for 3 billion years, all creatures. And I wrote a couple of other minor papers, but I decided it was not sufficient interest thereafter to do a study because the one I did was so all encompassing, in my life. And I was still practicing plastic surgery, and I paid for everything to get the assays done. I went to buy a vacation home to the pulmonologist to get him interested in doing the work that had to be done with regard to the asthma. And it was, a thrilling thing, but it takes, you see studies in journals And you think, well, that can't be very much work or something, but it's not true. They're prolonged processes, and they're difficult to get done. And and I just decided that did not want to be a diet doctor anyway. So I kind of stepped back from that. But I wrote a book called The Alternate Day Diet with my colleague Don Laub, and at times there were some of these sites on the internet, like I think low carb something or other, had people, 250,000 people followed my diet for periods of time. And so I had this strong interest because I used it myself. I still do. I still do fast, not in such a formal fashion. That is every other day doing 20%, but I'm always fasting either in the manner that Mark Matson favored thereafter, which was not eating for 12 hours or something like that. And so that's probably become the most popular form of intermittent fasting. But I wrote the first paper that was on alternate day fasting, which was really the original intermittent fasting paper.
Yeah,
And
there's so many. I feel like there's so many different ways that fasting can be, achieved there. Like you had the alternate day fasting there, and then I feel like one of the real popular ones now is the 16-8, like
right.
16 is not eating and then 8 hours. And then, which, some people can stick to. And then I feel like Brian Johnson kind of came along and started doing the more fasting towards the end of the day instead of the beginning of the day, which I feel like a lot of people do, so I don't know what your thoughts are on just like the different timings of it, or just maybe.
I think it is all good for you. And I think Walter Longo is probably the chief guru in terms of fasting now, because he demonstrated that if you fast for 3 days or four, I think maybe, that it renews your immune system, which is for people my age, as you get older, get past 50, is a very significant concern. And I was going to actually do a study with him, but then I thought, no, I, I didn't, I didn't have the motivation, because it was, they're so, they're so all enveloping, these studies are a major part of your life. And so I didn't do any more after that. But the book came out in 2008. I was on national TV. I'm still on, you can still find me on the internet. And I was on Fox News, and that doctor on there, Siegel, was the opposing view that they have, and he basically said, this is nonsense. And I said, no, there's an abundance of evidence for this to be exactly as I'm saying. And of course, as time went by, it became obvious that it was a very valuable thing for human health. And Mark Masson has written several articles since then saying that part of what you do if you want to age slower and be in better health is some kind of fasting, intermittent fasting, or the 16-8 or whatever. And it's very difficult to exclude all the variables that are involved. So I can't say that one works better than the other, but I know that our original study, which is still the most cited on alternate day fasting, had findings that were, I've never seen anything duplicated. And so it's I when I retired, I moved to Marin County, California, and the Buck Institute is about 15 minutes from my home. And I was very interested in research, and I went there and I gave some money to a couple of people for specific projects that they were working on. And they then asked me if I'd want to work on a study of ketone esters, which I did. And they demonstrated, that in older patients, that is, trying to repeat or reduplicate what the studies that have been done in young people. And they're still continuing to do it. It was the first clinical trial at the Buck Institute, and
And that
they
was the
give me
bike.
credit for it.
That's the bike
Yes,
trial. Yeah.
bike trial. Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so since then, I've branched out, and I've given a substantial amount of money and various studies that interested me, but it was it's very nice because I can talk to them as a clinician. I'm not a bench researcher, but I like the relationship because I'm working now with a neuroscientist, Lisa Ellerby, and Birgit Schilling on a study that's going to be very interesting, and we're going to relating the bone to the brain, and we may have some information that would change the way in which Alzheimer's disease is treated.
Wow.
So
That would be
that's
really
very
cool to
exciting to me.
see. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds
and
awesome.
but I, I met David Donnelly. He came through to interview, I think, Eric Verdon and maybe somebody else at the Buck. Eric Verdon is the CEO, and he interviewed me because I was the spokesmodel for the ketone ester study, and he videoed me and knew who I was, and then a couple of months later, he got them to call me to see if I was interested in being involved in a film that he was making. And I said I was interested, but I wasn't going to give me any money. But that soon changed. And I sponsored basically the entire film that we have made, which has turned out to be an absolute delight in my life and the others, because it's such a good film, and it's exciting to see something like this happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that film is amazing. When I was talking to David, he let me watch the movie, this pre-release, and I got to see it. And yeah, it's really cool. And I love how you were featured, just all throughout it. It's like the opening scenes of you working out, and then, towards the later scenes of, like we mentioned right before we started hitting record here, he's like, you playing music on your Stratocaster. And I'm like, all right, this is this is pretty cool stuff here. So just to drop a quick plug for it, I think it's coming out this month, or I think it's June that
Today,
it's
today,
today. Oh, amazing. On Apple TV. So I know it's
um,
available for pre-order, so people can actually watch it today on Apple TV, and it's
well,
titled
they can
Forever
watch
Young.
it. It's live. If you just go to your TV and turn on, if you have Apple TV, you can watch it right now.
Yeah, that's so cool.
And then we just found out we're going to be on Amazon and YouTube and probably a couple of other streamers.
Yeah,
So
that's so
it should
cool.
be available to anybody that wants to see it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I highly recommend it. I mean, I always geek out on the longevity films. There's a few of them out there that I really enjoyed, but I really enjoyed this version because it really, and I feel like a lot of these types of documentaries based around aging and longevity are all going to have this element of the future in them now, and that's what's really cool about this film, the Forever Young film that you were in, is just, I just love the technology aspect of it. Talked about, like, toilets are gonna, like, after you, take a bio break, and it's going to be like, hey, you got this going on, or, just like your personal assistant is going to be sitting on the countertop with you and say, hey, these are the vitamins you should take today, and custom formulate. And it's just, I'm really excited for that type of future, where we're just like, it takes all the things of the wearables that, we wear, and all the data that we have, but actually turn it into actionable things. And so, yeah,
Yeah,
the film is so cool.
my motivation was that I had been doing philanthropic things there for several years, and when he came through and he said he was going to make this film, I thought this is what I want to do for the Buck, because it'll raise their profile, and we could make a very very good film that was not biased in any way, that we could avoid it, and that it would be interesting to people because it would not be all science, but uh, some of the humanistic, emotional aspects of what we all face in life, and what our decisions are going to be when the choices exist to live longer, and many different sort of existential musings, as you saw. And my daughter was in it. She stands out, I think, in it. She's a psychiatrist also. And so we really had no idea from the beginning what it was going to be like. And I mean, I'm sure that David had a better image than I did, but it was it evolved very greatly, and we just are thrilled that it came out the way it did. We won the Audience Choice Award at the Mill Valley Film Festival, which is quite a prestigious festival, and
Yeah.
the scientists that were in it make such complimentary statements. Like Eric Verdin said, it's an absolute masterpiece. And Steve Horvath said it was phenomenal. It's a wonderful film. Virtually all of them are very complimentary. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that some of them are in the film, but I think it's quite objective in the treatment of the various things that might be controversial.
Yeah, yeah, I thought the film was incredibly balanced and very easy to watch. I always feel like my wife is like, yeah, yeah, another longevity thing. She sees me, taking all kinds of supplements and doing crazy exercise routines, or, like we are just talking about fasting. Usually I fast from Sunday night to Tuesday morning is kind of my once a week fast. So it just works best for my schedule because I love a good coffee and avocado toast too much. And I also like my dinners. So try to get it just out of the way. But anyway, she was able to watch it with me and really enjoy it as well. And even my 5-year-old son, he got a kick out of some of the animations and stuff even. So Jim, I want to talk to you, just double click back on fasting for a second. So for the listener that might be hearing this and be like fasting and just immediately tunes out because it's, like you said, it's a hard thing to do, right? To deny your body like, hey, I'm hungry. Okay, let's not eat for longer. It's this like natural response that I think a lot of us have. But sometimes at least when I talk to friends, I know like, they're like, yeah, intermittent fasting, whatever. They kind of tune it out. But I would like you to maybe elaborate on why simple just fasting works at a cellular level. I know you talked about the immune system a little bit, but can you explain a little bit more of what's going on in our bodies when we do fast and why it's so good for you?
Yes, the it's the first step in a long series of changes that occur downstream, as they say, that result in formation of various helpful molecules and the suppression of inflammatory molecules. The net effect is that there's a reduction in systemic inflammation, which I think probably most people are aware of, is the main action of the physiology of the body as you get older and as you get past 50 or so. The amount of inflammation increases, and when towards the end of life, it is increasing logarithmically. So this inflammation can be suppressed by the cellular and the molecular mechanisms that fasting induces. There are a number of a number of molecules that are formed, like the adverse ones, as I mentioned, are TNF alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha, that is responsible for rheumatoid arthritis. There are now medications that block the effect of TNF alpha and have produced miraculous results in people that have severe rheumatoid. And they also use these blockers for medicines that are medicines for ulcerative colitis and other really potentially severe diseases. I say that if somebody is interested in the molecular changes and the downstream kinds of effects, they could find a chart on the internet. Just look up inflammaging. That's a term coined a few years ago, meaning as you get older, for some reason that's not really understood, the the amount of inflammation increases and it causes damage to the cell, all cells, and the suppressive effect of the fasting reaction to it is highly effective. I mean, there's nothing that is comparable to fasting in trying to slow the aging process, really. There are a bunch of factors that I don't see any point in using the terms for because they are not really rememberable. But it's this is all worked out pretty well. If you just look for it, on the internet, you'll find a description of why inflammation is the number one cause of aging. And there are a number of supplements that are used to counteract that, there's evidence that nicotinamide mononucleotide, which is a precursor of NAD plus, is effective in suppressing inflammation, protecting the central nervous system, as are others such as urolithin A and acetylcysteine. And those are over-the-counter supplements that can be used to reduce the amount of inflammation. And I take several different things that have that responsibility or that effect. And the fasting part of the picture is at least as important as any supplement. To try to differentiate the benefits from supplements versus fasting is a little bit difficult or has not been exactly worked out. But metformin is a drug that there's been an attempt to categorize as a life-prolonging drug, but the FDA does not consider life a disease. Nir Barzilai, who is in our film, has spent several years working on getting this study started because there's clear evidence that metformin prolongs lifespan in people in a number of large studies, and as there are for other supplements, but the exact molecular function is not often worked. So far, it has not been worked out. One of the more recent supplements that I think everybody would be wise to take is spermidine, which activates autophagy, which is the process in the cells of eating the garbage proteins that are misfolded or made incorrectly, and they just clog up the cellular works, and the spermidine causes that garbage to be picked up and chewed up and recirculated into healthy proteins. And those phenomena, that is, the autophagy, is also induced by starvation or calorie restriction or reducing your intake. And I think the best thing to say would be that if you try to do some kind of fasting every day in the form of alternate day fasting or uh, 8, 8 and 16, or one that you can tolerate yourself, is a very good idea. And there's an abundance of science that has shown that those things prolong lifespan, or since we can't really measure what the effect on lifespan in humans is, we look at biomarkers of health and reduction of inflammation. And there's no question that these things occur with both fasting and using something like spermidine. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that you just kind of touched on there too, I guess earlier you were talking about Walter Longo and his fasting mimicking diet, which I always thought was pretty
right.
interesting with like Prolon or something like that. I've even heard Peter Attia talk about, just making a salad with, 5 olives and a little bit of olive oil to hit that whatever 600, 700 calorie mark for the 5 days, which is also really interesting, just to do that. And then I'm sure pairing it with something like spermidine, it's like, you talk about the cellular trash, but I always laugh at the coined term of zombie cells, right? It's like clearing out the zombie cells of with that. So
That's true too. The senolytic substances, which are effective in getting rid of senile cells, essentially, are in combination, I think, quite effective. And there's more and more known about that. And I think most of the people that are in the field take or more of these things like ficitin and quercetin. And there's a whole range of things that have come to light as being effective, polyphenols. And the I think the best new thing that I've heard about in the last year or two is nattokinase, which is, you may be familiar with it. It's a product that is derived from natto, which is a Japanese food that is made by putting soybeans on rice plants, which have a certain bacteria that cause the soybeans to turn into something that you probably wouldn't like eating, but the Japanese do eat in certain areas and not in other areas. And it's been shown that in the areas where they eat natto, their incidence of heart disease, about 50% of those who, compared to those who don't. And it works by the natural kinase is an enzyme that breaks down fibrinogen, which is an element of plaque. And if you take it on a regular basis, and I'm talking about 1,000 milligrams a day, it reduces the plaque burden in your entire body by about 36% after a period of 8 months, which is a remarkable benefit. And I enthusiastically take it and endorse it.
Yeah, I remember first hearing about natto and nattokinase, I don't know, years ago, and I was just like, I'm just going to go try some natto, and I was surprised that it's a very interesting taste, to say the least. But yeah, I will say, like, if you've never tried natto, go try it, just because it's a very unique thing in just all itself. But yeah, nattokinase supplement is a much easier thing to take and digest.
It's just a
Palatable.
pill. I think, generally speaking, I would just say to try to fast every day. You can just not eating all day, and one meal a day is beneficial. The most effective thing, though, is alternate day. I think the evidence is clear that if you can reduce your intake by about 80% on the alternate day, you can have remarkable effects on the levels of inflammatory markers
So you're
and
saying
oxidative stress.
So you're saying one day, just eat as you normally would, breakfast, lunch, dinner, coffee, tea, all that. And then the next day, you're saying cut your calories down to about 80% of normally what you could. So you could still potentially have a coffee or something light meal. Is that what you're
No,
talking?
you cut it down to 20%. I mean, it doesn't have to be that severe. There was a study done by a Spanish gastroenterologist in the 50s named Alejo, who he was in charge of a nursing home. So it was all people 65 and older, and there were 120 residents, and he divided it in two groups. One which just ate the normal cafeteria food, which is a well-balanced meal, 50 grams of protein, standard kind of good proportions. And the other that every other day got a quart of milk and 500 grams of fruit, which amounts to about 900 calories. So the reduction, and we wrote a paper on this, correcting a previous observation that was incorrect. The level of calorie intake when this was done was probably about 1,600 calories a day. And so on the day in which they were eating a low calorie diet, it was 900. So the difference there is, maybe a 40% reduction. And at the end of 3 years, there were significant differences in the health of the two groups. There were 3 times as many deaths, but it was not significant statistically. But in those people who were on the milk and fruit program every other day, they had very statistically significant reduction in visits to the infirmary, which is correlated highly with mortality. So if you carried the study out longer than 3 years, you would have seen probably a lot more deaths. One of the greatest predictors of future death, near future death, is the occurrence of visits to the hospital within 6 months of the time of death. And so the significance of it was, even though it lacked some significant data, but it was clear that they were only eating the difference between probably 120% of food on the day when they were eating the cafeteria food, and the other, which would be something like 40% of their daily requirement. So it doesn't have to be as severe as 120. That was just my original design. And so I think if you can cut down your caloric intake by 50%, you're probably getting sufficient stimulus to experience benefits. And these things will be worked out in the future, I'm sure, but it's a slow process simply because doing a study like that would be a very expensive process nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jim, you're not theorizing any of this. You're actually living this in your day-to-day life. Obviously, when you're younger and you found out you had the heart condition and stuff, this kind of set you on this path. So what does a normal day look like for you for now? And then you kind of alluded to that you've changed your approach as you got older, not necessarily that you would be doing the same things, say 10, 20 years ago, but what does your day to day look like now? And how's that kind of changed a little bit over the last, say 10, 15, 20 years?
Right. When I started, as I said, people thought I was nuts because nobody had ever done it. And I had some ridicule. And for 3.5 months, I followed the 100%, 20%. I said it wasn't actually 100%. It was eating ad lib. So I might have eaten more than 100%. And that doesn't seem to matter. On the down day, the low day, I stuck to as close to 20%. I liberalized it a little bit so that it was, I raised it to about 500 calories a day on the down day. That's more feasible. It's much more pleasant. And in the study, we used canned shakes because it's difficult for people to estimate exactly what the food that they're eating is. And if you give them the option of a salad, for example, they'll put on, 5 tablespoons of salad dressing that have sugar and oil in it. And I think that's the only way that you can really start on it, because otherwise you misjudge. You say, I can have this hot dog on top of this piece of tofu, but you have to have certain restraints at the beginning. And there have been a number of other formulations that have been effective. There's a woman named Krista Verity that's written several papers on this, and she really kind of dominates the field, or did, after the early, when I wrote my paper, which was published in 2006. But the popularity of the diet, or the belief that the diet was effective, has grown over time. In 2018, the most popular diet, I guess nationwide, was intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting doesn't mean anything because it doesn't define exactly what you're talking about, but there's little doubt that fasting of some sort is very effective. And what you're doing is very effective, 1 day a week. That's a very admirable program to follow. Years ago, there was a study in Mormons that fasted 1 day a month, and they had a 40% reduction in the incidence of heart attacks just from 1 day a month. But what I was convinced by when I first started it, and I lost 35 pounds, and I had a patient who was asthmatic, and that's where I got the idea of using overweight asthmatics as the subjects, because I wanted to be sure that they were going to be motivated. And she used 2 inhalers twice a day. And after 3 weeks on the diet, she was off everything. And it really had some really remarkable effects. Another woman was 69 years old, had meningitis 10 years before, and it seriously damaged her balance. And she couldn't walk without having somebody support her. If she had to get weighed, she had to have 2 people, help her stand on the scale. And the balance is dependent on the health of the vestibular nerve and the vestibular nucleus in the brain. And she was on the diet for 3 weeks, and she came in one day and said and she was walking without assistance, having been really disabled by it for 10 years. And it's hard to really reveal what is happening there, but it has to be because of inflammation in the brain at some point, in the vestibular mechanism. And there were many other amazing changes just in an 8-week period. The pulmonologist said that as a whole, the group had been raised by 1 category of severity with their asthma, and they lost about 19 pounds, I think, during the 8 weeks. So
Wow.
the reduction in inflammation is a measurable biomarker. I mean, if you have sinusitis, it goes away, or if you have some kinds of arthritis, it goes away within 2 weeks or so. And I had several of the people continue following the diet for many months thereafter. I lost contact with them eventually, but if you look for it, you will see that there are things that are happening to you that are favorable and you feel better and so on.
I love that. I love that. I just love seeing, especially something such as simple as fasting, where a lot of things I talk about, is like there's a vast divide between a lot of longevity and anti-aging stuff is very expensive, right? Very experimental, or even just having a longevity doctor
Mm,
is
yeah.
quite a financial commitment. And a lot of people can't make that jump financially a lot of times. And so I love hearing you talk about something such as simple as fasting. Yes, it's difficult, but it's also free, or low cost, if nothing else, and likely even saving you money, because if you're eating, it's like every other day or
Yes.
whatever. So, but also having the compounded benefits of over time of something like that, of obviously the more you do it, the longer you stick to it, it sounds like greater the benefits of, like weight loss eventually, and inflammation and all of that. So it's just such a cool thing to hear you talk about. And then you're such a pioneer in the space too. It's like way before everyone was, the Instagram influencers, and so many people are talking about it like it's the greatest thing since sliced bread nowadays. But it's just really cool that you've been doing this and investigating and actively researching, and even just with the bike study with the Buck Institute and stuff, like you've truly believed in this and funded research, and really has shown that it to be quite an effective thing. So that's just an amazing contribution. And I mean, I just want to personally thank you for being involved in it and pushing the needle, because there's so many people that reap the benefits from that research, or even just like that first time you went to the Buck Institute to help them along with the clinical trial. It's just super amazing. So just thank you for that. So, and I also want to wrap this up because we've been talking for about an hour now, and I want to respect your time. And how do people find out? I mean, we talked about the Forever Young film that you're in. Are there any other ways that, people can find out more about you or the research, or should we direct them to the Buck Institute? Where,
Well,
where would you?
we have a Substack. I think it's called Forever Young Movie, and
Mm.
we put articles on there regularly. We have something like 80 or 100 articles, as well as videos that are instructive, and we try to find subjects that are not covered elsewhere. I mean, certain people like Peter Attia are going to systematically through the cardiovascular system and the GI system and so on. And we try to be eclectic and pick things that are maybe not as conspicuous as others, and we get good feedback. One of the things that we reported on is the use of bisphosphonates, because there's apparently a very strong pro survival effect. It's very good for longevity, and if people can find our articles. If people want to know the basic concepts, they can read articles by Mark Mattson. His are very clear, and he's the original. And I learned from him everything I know, and he's a wonderful man and surely devoted scientist. I mean, he just doesn't waste any time.
Yeah, he's a legend.
Right. He is, and he's a great guy.
And for those
But if
listening that might want to look him up, his last name is spelled Atson. Just so
right.
if you want to do some research on him, I think he still works at the NIH, right? I believe he does.
He retired from that and went to Johns Hopkins
Okay,
about 6 or 7 years ago.
okay, okay, okay.
But I'm thinking I'm going to contact him, and we're going to I hope he will do an interview on our Substack,
Yeah, that'd be
because
great. And then also we have the article you wrote on our website, Spanner, SPANNR, about the longevity mindset, that actually we're going to have that go live probably right when this podcast is going live. So especially now that the film is officially released today, I was kind of waiting to publish all of that and then have that. So I had David's episode go live a week or two ago, and then we'll have yours go live as soon as possible, as well as that article about the longevity mindset. So that was a super cool article. And again, I appreciate you writing that and able to guest post. And I will
well,
make sure.
it's my mission, when I retired, I decided, everybody says you have to have a mission. And this is just the only thing that I would consider to be making my mission, except learning to play the guitar.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, do you have a band, or is it just a solo project at this point?
No, one of my grandsons has really passed me up just in a period of a year. He's amazing. But I do it I take 1 4-hour lesson a week with with a professional musician, and I love it.
That's so
I
awesome.
know, for that 4 hours, I'm in a different world, and
Yeah, I
makes me
feel like it's
happy.
like that's one of the keys to staying young too, keep constantly learning, that mindset of always learning things, whether it's a language, music, whatever it is, but it's like having that healthy part of it. So, Jim, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate your time and your just wealth of knowledge. I wish we had 4 hours to just go into everything. And I hope to
It does take time.
Yeah, it just time flies. But and I hope to meet you in person at some point. Like, I was talking to David about getting together with him at some point, but yeah, maybe we'll see you at some longevity event or at the Buck Institute at some point in the
Do,
future. But
do you go to some of the events?
yeah,
Some of
yeah,
the
I try to as much as possible because I've got 3 kind of longevity businesses. One is the longevity clinic marketing that I help clinics get found online. So that's kind of like my MO, is because when I was looking for a longevity doctor in 2017, I didn't even know I was looking for a longevity doctor. I just wanted a good doctor. And then I stumbled across a great doctor in Austin, Texas. They run Apeiron, Dr. Dan Stickler and Dr. Micah Hamilton. And they just gave me a whirlwind of an education while I was under their guidance and care. And I was just like, I really need to find more of these practitioners. And so I took my whole marketing agency that kind of worked with everyone, and they just completely shifted to the niche of longevity because I'm just so interested. I love talking to people like yourself and practitioners and clinicians. And so that's one of it. And then we have Spanner, which is kind of the longevity umbrella of everything. And then, of course, this podcast, the Longevity Loop podcast. And so, I feel like my mission is as well is just, like just getting people excited and more people tuned into this kind of medicine because it's so life-changing. It's like my parents, like, just getting them tuned into it, and so they can extend their lives and be healthier, like moving forward. And my son, is like being 5 is such an incredible thing for him growing up in this environment that, like, the possibilities are endless, I feel. So it's just an exciting time.
I have no doubt that what David Sinclair says is going to turn out to be pretty much what we expect in the next few years. I've
Yeah.
invested heavily in his life biosciences, and I'm very
Yeah.
excited about it.
Yeah, I love his book. I mean, still, like, his book is just one of my favorite kind of just foundational, and even you talked about Near's book. I think Age Later is his first book, but yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so many good books out there and just so many people just doing awesome work. So with that, Jim, just thank you again so much for coming on. And, and then I'll put the links to the Substack and the movie on Apple TV and everything in the show notes. So anyone listening to this can easily find all of that stuff. And I'll also link to Madsen's work and a lot of that stuff because it's all awesome place. So with that
Great, Brent.
said,
I think you're doing a great thing with what you're doing. I mean,
thanks.
I feel like I'm part of a team that is just motivated one individual by individual, and that it gives me great pleasure.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, it's a great community, and it's just always so much fun just to run into. I mean, just so many brilliant minds. I mean, that's the thing that that I'm just always floored by is like how many smart people are involved in this space, and I don't know, it's just a cool time to be part of it.
Wait till you
So
talk to Tom Lewis. Talk about brilliance.
yeah, we got him scheduled, like I said, like next week. I think that's when he comes on. So yeah, I'm super excited to talk to him as well. So
We're gonna go to Cape Cod and give a screening or a couple of screenings to the Harvard Club June 17th, and we're excited about that. We were invited by another podcast host to do it, and he said the film is a national treasure.
it's amazing. That's a great
So
compliment. That's
yeah, it is.
great. Well, cool. Well, thanks again,
Well,
Jim,
thank you very much.
and we'll be in touch, I'm sure. So
Thank you
take
very
care.
much, Brent.
Bye
Okay,
bye.
bye.
This is the Longevity Loop podcast.